They pried it out of the soil with gloved fingers, just a thin silver bracelet dulled by time, heart-shaped charm winking through a veil of dirt. It lay on a flat of evidence paper like a whispered name, as if the ground had kept it safe until it couldn't anymore. The wind off Biscayne Bay lifted the palmetto fronds, and the tape along the fence rattled, and everyone standing there knew some things don't surface by accident. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit like and subscribe if you believe some names should never fade. I've lived long enough to know that peace isn't silence. It's the hum of familiar things. In Coconut Grove, early summer sounded like sprinklers ticking across St. Augustine grass, bicycle chains clicking past Banyan Drive, and the soft thud of a rolled-up Miami Herald landing on porches at 5:30 sharp. My morning started on my front steps with a mug of coffee and a little salt in the air. The bay never far heat already settling in by 8. I walked the same half-mile to the corner market for eggs and a lottery quick pick I never expected to hit. Routine as dependable as a porch light. Across from me, the Ransom house was a one-story stucco with a hibiscus hedge and a mailbox that leaned a few degrees too far toward the street. I'd helped Carol set that post back in '97. We tamped the soil, wiped the sweat off with our sleeves, and she laughed when the thing pitched forward again the minute we turned our backs. Carol had a laugh that traveled warm, clean, honest. She raised her daughter there mostly on her own, and a neighborhood like ours stepped in where we could. If the world was still big and mean, the block had a way of feeling small and manageable, like it might hold together just by being looked after. Amanda grew up on that stretch of pavement, long legs, dark ponytail, knees scuffed from rollerblades at first, and later from sliding under the hood of a second-hand Toyota to get the belt right. She was the kind of kid who learned how things worked and then made them better, sewing a ripped backpack seam so the stitching looked factory, organizing our yard sale tables by price with hand-lettered tags that looked like they came out of a store. In her last year at the Art Institute, she stood on my porch holding mock-ups for a logo she'd designed for my old union scholarship fund. She wanted the blue a little deeper, the lines cleaner, the whole thing to feel like it belonged to the hands that used ink and newsprint. She cared about details the way some people care about breath. Coconut Grove in June lays over you like a warm, damp blanket. By late afternoon, the air holds steady around 86 degrees, and the sidewalks shimmer. Boats nose through the marinas, throwing off that diesel salt smell you either love or you don't. People in our part of town settle into the evening in predictable ways. Porch fans turning box scores on low radios, dogs nosing along the hedge line. Around 7, the sun drops just enough to soften the edges, and you start seeing walkers 2 miles if you loop the park back in an hour if you don't stop at the bodega. Amanda's loop. I could set my watch by the sight of that yellow tank top at the corner and the chalk-white sneakers hitting the crosswalk like metronomes. Carol kept her porch perfect, even when money ran slimmer than anyone knew geraniums alive in cracked terracotta, a little brass dolphin knocker polished to a glow. On summer nights, she'd sit with a glass of sweet tea and a church fan tucked behind her back, and we'd compare notes from the day the man at the market who insisted he could return a watermelon because it felt judgmental the way the city kept promising to fix the pothole at the end of Gifford Street and never did. Ordinary talk, small threads that made a net. Detective Jack Morales used to show up at our parish picnic in a softball jersey that said "Saints" across the chest's thick wrists and a laugh that came out like a bark. He could flip burgers with one hand and keep score with the other. When I knew him then, he was just Jack from the second pew on the left, the guy who loaned our teen volunteers those bright safety vests when we cleaned trash out of the mangroves. If the world had more complicated corners, they were his problem on weekdays. On Sundays, he ate potato salad and asked about your aunt's hip. Amanda's life after graduation folded into a steady rhythm that made sense to anyone who was paying attention. She'd landed a small office job doing layout and brand work for local shops' menus, window clings, clean little logos that fit the Grove's mix of old Florida and new money. Her rent was reasonable because the landlord had known Carol since high school. Most days she biked. Some evenings she walked. When she walked, Carol would call out from the porch, "Back by 9, kiddo," and Amanda would lift her hand without turning a quick wave that said, "I heard you." The tiny rituals of care that keep a house upright. I kept a toolbox under my kitchen counter for neighborhood nonsense, loose hinge, wobbly shelf. The little things you fix before they become big things. Amanda borrowed it the week before summer really set in. She wanted to rehang a frame in her apartment, she said, the one with the Biscayne skyline she'd sketched from the marina. I watched her step off the curb box tucked under her arm and thought about how some folks move through the world with a light that isn't loud. What I noticed later, because I'm old enough to know the feel of before and after, was the way she paused at the end of the driveway that day, 1 foot in shadow, 1 foot in sun, like she was measuring something only she could see. Our block had a whole map of tiny kindnesses that lived on schedules. Dot Thompson, 2 doors down, fed the alley cats at dusk and clapped twice when she was done, as if to say, "That's it, fellas." Mr. Kim watered his lawn right at 7, even though it didn't need it just to stand there with his hose and talk football with whoever was walking past. The bodega on the corner kept a jar for Little League fees, singles, and quarters piling up like a community ledger. If there were moving parts that could go wrong, we trusted they wouldn't because they hadn't yet. The first faint crack, if you could call it that, came on a Tuesday when the afternoon clouds stacked high and dark but refused to break. The humidity pinned us all to our porches with a pressure you felt behind your eyes. Carol stepped over with a bundle of mail that had landed in her box by mistake. My pension statement, a coupon book, a postcard from my brother in Ocala, and mentioned offhand that the landlord in Amanda's building had swapped out a porch light bulb for one that buzzed like a horsefly. "Drove her nuts last night," she said, smiling, "but she'll fix it. You know how she is." Nothing in the remark itself felt odd. It was the way Carol's fingers kept worrying the corner of the mail, testing the edge like she had something more to say, and let it pass. Thursday, just before sunset, I saw Amanda at the park gate, bent over a notebook. The heat had warned the joggers away. Only dog walkers were out letting leashes drag while their pets nosed through sawgrass. Amanda had her foot on the bottom bar of the fence and was sketching quick strokes, then a slower line to pull the shapes together. She glanced up when a truck rolled past too fast and the fence rattled. Nothing unusual, just a little flinch you chalk up to noise. Still, when I waved, she didn't see me right away. She finished the line she was on, closed the book, and lifted a hand. Light, brief. Then she tucked the pencil behind her ear and headed toward the bodega for a bottle of water. I remember the feel of that evening more than anything concrete. The air had that sugar burn it gets from the bakery on Fuller Street, and somewhere a radio ran a ball game low enough you couldn't make out the innings. The light turned gold and then thin. I pulled my recycling bin to the curb and set out a small bag of mangoes I'd picked from the neighbor's tree for whoever wanted to take a few. At 8:30, the power flickered only once, a 2-second hiccup that made porch fans stutter and reset. When our block blinked back to life, you could hear televisions powering up one by one down the street. Carol liked a particular kind of order in the kitchen that I teased her about, measuring cups, nested labels facing forward, spoons arranged from largest to smallest. So when I stepped over close to 9 to return a casserole dish she'd lent me, I noticed right away that her front room wore that same careful order, except for one thing. The lamp by the sofa was on shade, tilted just slightly, as if someone had bumped it and meant to fix it later. The screen door was latched, but the main door stood open to catch the airflow. From the street, it looked like a painting of a Florida evening done by someone who knew the color of ordinary comfort. I set the dish on the hall table and called toward the kitchen. "Knock, knock," I said, because Carol liked the ritual of calling out as you entered, even when she'd told you to come on in. She answered from the back, that easy voice of hers. She was fixing a pitcher of tea. The ice cracked in the glass like far-off thunder. We covered our usual ground, the weather, whether the Marlins would ever find their swing, what on earth the city intended to do with the empty lot by the park that had turned into a jungle of palmetto and scrub. She rolled her eyes at that last one. "If they mow it once a year, it's a miracle," she said. Amanda hates walking past it after dark, says it feels like the ground has a secret. She smiled to take the edge off the words. A little before 9:30, the neighborhood settled deeper into itself. Porch lights clicked on up and down the block. The corner store's neon open sign buzzed, and then went dead, leaving their ATM inside placard to glow alone. A warm breeze moved through the trees, and that old mailbox of Carol's leaned a degree farther, as if the night itself were pushing it. I took my leave with a promise to fix the hinge on her back gate Saturday morning. Back at my place, I washed my coffee mug and set it upside down on a towel, the habit of a man who has lived alone a long time. The ceiling fan pushed a steady whisper around the room. When I sat, the leather of my chair warmed to my skin. Small things. Good things. Out front, a pair of headlights idled at the corner, turned left, and disappeared down toward the bay. I glanced at the clock on the microwave, 9:41, then at the window where I could just see the Ransom's porch light through the side yard. It glowed the way a lighthouse glows firmer than a lamp has any right to, like its job was to keep you pointed home. If there was a second crack in the smooth face of that day, it was a small one. Carol's screen door creaked open around 9:50 and tapped shut. The porch light remained on. I watched it the way you watch your own driveway after a long trip, expecting the shape of your car to tip over the curb any minute. Somewhere down on Main Highway, a motorcycle shifted through gears and faded. Over the park, the dark gathered into itself. The palm behind my fence clattered its leaves and then stilled. I picked up the remote, set it down again, and listened to the neighborhood breathe. At 10 o'clock, the street felt 1 degree emptier than it had at 9:50. Not dangerous, not yet. Just a whisper of space where sound should be a door that ought to open a footstep that should touch the walk. The porch light across the street kept its post shining steady into a night that suddenly seemed larger than usual. By 10:15, I could see the outline of Carol's hand on the curtain as she looked once more up the block and then let the fabric fall. The porch light stayed on, spilling a pale circle over the front steps and the leaning mailbox. Somewhere a phone did not ring. And in that stillness, the hour took a breath and held it. That night carried a kind of stillness you only notice when something's gone wrong, though you don't yet know it. I remember sitting in my chair, the fan pushing warm air across the room, the porch light across the street holding steady against the dark. By 10:15, I saw Carol pull the curtain closed, her silhouette still for a moment, before it disappeared. I didn't think much of it. Then maybe Amanda had stayed late at the coffee shop. Maybe she'd stopped to talk to someone at the park. But by the time I turned in, a heaviness hung over the block that I couldn't name. The next morning my phone rang before sunrise. Carol's voice was different, thin, hollow. "Frank, she said she's not home. Amanda never came back. I was out the door before she hung up." The street felt wrong in daylight. The same driveways, the same mailboxes, the same palm leaves brushing against wires, but quieter, as if the sound had been drained out of it. Carol stood on her porch, barefoot, her housecoat pulled tight. She held Amanda's phone charger in one hand, twisting the cord as if it might give her answers. "She always calls," she said. "Even if she's running late. She always calls." Inside the house, the table was set for two. A mug half filled with cold tea sat beside Amanda's sketchbook. The air smelled faintly of coconut lotion, the kind Amanda used after her walks. Everything looked paused, as though the night had ended mid-breath. I told her I'd take the park route while she called the police. The morning was already warming fast, a haze rising off the pavement. I walked the 2-mile loop Amanda took nearly every evening past the bodega, the bus stop, the row of banyans that arched over the sidewalk like ribs. Her route was as familiar to me as my own driveway. But that morning it felt foreign. I looked for something bright, something out of place, her yellow tank top, her bracelet, anything that didn't belong to the ordinary world. There was nothing. No shoe prints, no scraps, no sign of struggle. Just the steady hum of sprinklers and the distant buzz of traffic on Bayshore Drive. By the time I got back, a patrol car sat in front of the Ransom house. Detective Jack Morales stepped out his tie, already loosened, a notebook in one hand. I hadn't seen him in years, not since a church picnic, but the weight of his job showed in his eyes. He nodded when he saw me. "Frank," he said quietly, "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." Inside, Carol sat at the kitchen table, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles were white. Morales spoke gently, asking when she'd last seen Amanda, what she was wearing, whether she'd mentioned plans. Carol's answers came out steady at first, then began to break. She described the yellow tank, the white sneakers, the way Amanda always walked with her earbuds in. She left at 7:15, she said. She said, "Love you, Mom." She never said that without meaning to come home. Morales sent out a notice immediately. Within hours, volunteers from the community were stapling flyers to telephone poles and taping them to storefront windows. Her picture, smiling sunlit, holding a sketch pad, looked almost defiant against the word "missing" in bold red. I joined the first search crew that evening. The air clung heavy to our shirts as we combed Peacock Park flashlights cutting through the humid dark. A few college kids from Amanda's design firm showed up, their faces pale and bewildered, one of them carrying a box of flyers damp from sweat. Everyone knew her. Everyone wanted to believe she'd turn up safe. Morales worked the case as if he'd been waiting for it all his life. He pulled cell records, canvassed shops, questioned every vendor who might have seen her that night. The last signal from her phone came at 7:42 p.m., a ping near the park half a mile from home. After that, silence. He told me that meant either the battery had died or the phone had been shut off manually. Neither sounded good. Still, he kept his tone calm the way men do when they know panic doesn't help. For days, the neighborhood moved like a single body. Retirees brought coffee to the search team, the owner of the bodega kept a thermos by the register for officers, and every night Carol sat on her porch with the light on waiting. The scent of night-blooming jasmine hung thick in the air. You could hear the crickets, the buzz of the highway, even the soft slap of waves against the bay. But there was one sound missing, the rhythmic tread of Amanda's sneakers on the sidewalk. Without it, the neighborhood lost its heartbeat. By the third day, the helicopters arrived, 2 of them sweeping low over Biscayne Bay, with spotlights tracing the shoreline. Divers searched the mangroves, the airboats churning through brown water where secrets could hide for years. I watched from the park's edge as Morales stood with his hands on his hips, staring at the water. When he turned to me, his expression told me what I didn't want to hear. "We're not finding anything, Frank," he said. "No clothing, no personal items, nothing. It's like she vanished in midair." Every missing person case starts the same way, with urgency, hope, and the belief that answers are just around the corner. But when days turn into weeks, the edges of that hope start to fray. The flyers fade in the sun, the volunteers have to return to work, and the neighborhood starts to settle back into routine, even as guilt tugs at everyone's conscience. Carol didn't sleep much. I'd see her at dawn, walking the same route Amanda used to take, scanning the ground as if she might find some trace that everyone else missed. Sometimes she carried her daughter's sketchbook under her arm, as though keeping it close might summon her back. Morales came by often, always with something new: surveillance footage, phone records, interviews. Each lead started bright and ended in shadow. A store clerk thought she saw Amanda near the gas station. A neighbor heard a car door slam around 8. None of it held up. At one point, Morales sat on my porch, his jacket draped over the railing, the sweat dark on his shirt collar. "You know," he said, "we get these cases, and every time we tell ourselves this one will be different, that we'll find them quick, bring them home." He looked down the street where the ransom porch light still burned even in daylight. "Then you realize how big this city really is." Summer slipped into hurricane season, and Amanda's case grew cold before the first storm rolled in. The command post came down, the volunteers drifted away, and the local news stopped calling. But Carol never stopped. Every year on the anniversary of that night, she'd organize a small candlelight walk through the park. A dozen of us would show up holding photos and candles that sputtered in the wind. The city moved on, but for Carol, time stayed rooted in that one humid evening. 8 years is a long time to live with an empty chair at the kitchen table. I watched her age in those years, her shoulders rounding, her hair streaking silver, but her voice stayed steady when she spoke about Amanda. "She's out there somewhere," she'd say, like it was both prayer and defiance. I never corrected her. What could I say? Then came April of 2017. It was one of those mornings when the humidity pressed low and the air smelled like cut grass. I was fixing a porch step when I heard sirens down near Peacock Park. Nothing unusual. Miami has its share of noise, but these sirens didn't fade. They clustered. Within an hour, word spread a landscaper clearing a vacant lot had found something, a small piece of jewelry, unearthed from the dirt. At first, no one connected it to Amanda. That lot had been abandoned for years, the weeds taller than a man. But when the photo hit the local news, Carol called me. Her voice trembled. "Frank," she whispered, "that's her bracelet." I drove down to the lot before noon. The heat was thick, and the place was swarming with uniforms. Yellow tape flapped between palm trunks. The air buzzed with insects and police radios. I saw Morales again, older now, hair grayer, but eyes just as sharp. He stood over a folding table where an evidence bag lay under a fluorescent lamp rigged from the trunk of a cruiser. Inside it, I saw the bracelet, silver heart-shaped charm engraved with a single letter A. I didn't need to ask whose it was. I'd seen it flash on Amanda's wrist 100 times, catching the sun when she waved. Carol arrived soon after, walking slow, like each step might betray her. When she saw the bracelet, she pressed her hand to her mouth and nodded. "That's hers," she said softly. "I gave it to her for her 21st birthday." The words seemed to pull the air out of the day. Even the cicadas went quiet. Morales promised her they'd find the rest, but I could see the fear behind his eyes. 8 years of waiting had taught him that clues don't resurface by accident. They shut the area down for 2 days. I watched from behind the barricade as forensic techs swept the lot with metal detectors and cadaver dogs. They found nothing else, no clothing, no bones, no sign of a body. Just that single bracelet, tarnished but intact. When Morales came by later, he told me the condition of the metal suggested it hadn't been exposed to weather for long. "It was protected," he said, tapping his notebook, "like it was stored somewhere and then buried recently." That night, I couldn't sleep. The air was thick with the smell of rain, and I sat on my porch listening to thunder roll over the bay. Across the street, Carol's light burned again, the same porch lamp that had stayed on every night since Amanda disappeared. I thought about that bracelet sitting in an evidence locker waiting for the story it carried. Somewhere in the city, someone knew why it had surfaced now, after all those years. The next morning, Morales called me to say they were tracing the lot's ownership. It was bought by a developer back in '07, he said. A man named Victor Salazar. He left town a year after Amanda vanished. The name didn't ring a bell, but something in Morales' tone told me it mattered. "We're looking into his employees," he added. "There's a connection we're missing, but we'll find it." As he spoke, I watched a pair of mockingbirds tug at a palm frond for nesting material. The sun was high, burning the dew off the lawns. Life, stubborn as ever, kept moving forward. But for the first time in 8 years, it felt like the story that had frozen our little corner of Miami might finally start to move again. And somewhere beneath that cracked earth by the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that more secrets were waiting to be found. When Morales told me that the property by the park belonged to a developer named Victor Salazar, I remember watching the sunlight hit the coffee in my cup, catching on the steam, and thinking how odd it was that one name could change the color of a whole morning. He said it so quietly, like he didn't want to stir the air too much. Salazar. I didn't know him personally, but in a city like Miami, you hear names. He'd been one of those men whose picture showed up in the business section, tan suit, hand on a shovel at some groundbreaking, always smiling beside the mayor or some investor, the kind of man who looked like he owned every inch of the sunshine around him. That afternoon, Morales called again. "Frank, we're checking something," he said. "The bracelet didn't just end up there. Somebody put it there recently." His tone carried the weight of 8 years' worth of unanswered questions. I could tell this wasn't going to fade back into silence this time. Within days, the lot was swarming again. Crime scene tents, police tape snapping in the breeze, news vans lined up like gulls. I drove down and stood on the sidewalk across the street, just close enough to hear the radio chatter and the crunch of boots over gravel. The place looked smaller than I remembered. What had once been wild with palmetto and weeds was now trimmed and cordoned off earth, turned up in neat squares. The air had that heavy stillness it gets before summer rain. Morales was there, sleeves rolled, notebook in hand, same calm focus I'd seen in him years ago when Amanda first went missing. He spotted me, gave a nod, then walked over. "We found more," he said. "Not her, not yet, but something that ties back." He told me about a man named Diego Navarro, a handyman, used to work for Salazar back when the lot was being prepped for development. Had a blue pickup that matched a witness's memory, the same one an elderly neighbor had mentioned seeing parked near the property late one night in 2009. "We ran his plates," Morales said. "He's in Tampa now. Small contractor, clean enough record, but I don't like coincidences. It's funny you spend your life around ordinary people, and you think you can read who's trouble and who's not. But I'd learned by then that evil didn't always come wearing warning signs. Sometimes it wore paint on its hands and smiled at you while fixing your fence. They brought Navarro in a week later. Morales told me he was nervous, jumpy, wouldn't hold eye contact. When they showed him Amanda's bracelet, he flinched not much but enough. Claimed he didn't know her, said he must have found it during a job and thought it was junk. But Morales didn't buy it. He told me afterward, guilt makes people talk too much or not at all. He's the quiet kind. It was mid-May by then, the heat sitting low and thick. The neighborhood smelled of cut grass and salt, and every evening the sky burned orange before it went purple. Carol came over most nights. She'd sit on my porch, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she never drank. They said they found her sneakers, she told me one night, voice barely above the cicadas, in his storage unit. Her eyes were distant, like she'd run out of tears years ago. White ones, she said, scuffed at the toes. I remembered those shoes. I'd seen them 100 times, stepping over cracks in the sidewalk, stopping to tie a lace. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. Sometimes silence is all you can offer when words would only make it worse. Morales visited again later that week. He looked tired, like a man carrying the whole case on his back. "We're close, Frank," he said. "Navarro's talking around something. Keeps mentioning Salazar, says he was working that lot the week Amanda disappeared. There's money involved, late-night calls, things that don't line up." He rubbed a hand across his face. "But without a body, without physical proof, it's like trying to hold smoke." The city started paying attention again. Reporters with perfect hair and heavy microphones came knocking on doors, asking about the artist who vanished. They said it like a title, not a name. The rest of us just called her Amanda. One morning, Morales told me they'd found a storage lease still active in Navarro's name, a 10-by-10 unit on the edge of town. Inside, under layers of paint cans and old tools, they found a locked metal box. In that box were the sneakers. No blood, no damage, just dirt that matched the soil from the park lot. It was as though pieces of Amanda's life had been hidden in pockets of the city, waiting for someone patient enough to uncover them. When I heard that, I walked down to the banyan by the park. The air smelled of rain, again heavy and metallic, and I found myself tracing my fingers over the bark the way you might touch a gravestone. Morales told me they had to let Navarro go. Not enough evidence to hold him, not yet. But they kept eyes on him. "He's scared," Morales said. "Scared men make mistakes." The investigation shifted toward Salazar then. Morales pulled every record he could find, property deeds, payroll files, bank statements. That's when they discovered the cash withdrawals, $10,000–15,000 at a time, right around the week Amanda disappeared. Developers don't deal in cash like that, Morales told me, not unless they're paying for something they can't put on paper. Salazar still lived in Miami, tucked away in a gated community on Key Biscayne, his mansion all glass and stone and silence. Morales brought him in for questioning, said he was polite, rehearsed, maybe too polished, claimed he barely remembered the property, that his employees handled all of it. He talked like a man who's been managing his image for years, Morales said. Every word just enough, never too much. But Morales had something Salazar didn't know, a list of calls between his phone and Navarro's late at night in June 2009. One of them made at 11:42 p.m. hours after Amanda's last phone ping. When Morales mentioned it, Salazar's jaw tightened, the only crack in his calm. "We're done here," he said, asking for his lawyer. After that, it was a waiting game. You could feel the city lean in. Everyone who'd once forgotten started remembering. Neighbors compared notes. People came forward with stories. A truck they'd seen, a noise in the park that night, a woman crying near the old construction fence. Most of it led nowhere, but each detail added weight to the air like humidity before a storm. One evening, Morales called and said, "You remember that volunteer Sophia from the first search team, the one who used to catalog flyers I did? She'd been a librarian back then, quiet but sharp. She kept a journal," he said, wrote down everything from the search. Turns out she noted a security camera 2 blocks from the lot, a bar off Main Highway. The footage might still exist. I didn't breathe for a second. After 8 years, the idea that something new might exist felt almost dangerous. Morales tracked down the bar's former owner, now retired in Homestead. The man had saved his old hard drives out of habit, and there it was, grainy footage from that night. A dark blue pickup pulling to the curb at 8:15 p.m. A figure the size and shape of Navarro loading something long and heavy into the truck bed, covering it with a tarp. A sliver of yellow fabric caught the light just before he shut the tailgate. It could have been anything. It could have been everything. When Morales confronted Navarro with the video, the man broke like wet wood. First he denied it, then said he'd been hired to move junk. But when Morales pressed, the truth began to seep out in fragments. A late-night call from Salazar, a job gone wrong, a girl who wasn't supposed to be there. He said she startled him. Navarro whispered. He panicked. She fell. Morales told me his hands shook as he said it. The rest was clean-up, hiding, burying, moving. Salazar had paid him to make it disappear to move the body later when the searches got too close. Navarro said he kept Amanda's things, the bracelet, the shoes, as insurance proof he could use if Salazar ever turned on him. Morales arrested Navarro on the spot for accessory after the fact. He told me later, you could see the relief in his face, like confessing was the first good thing he'd done in years. But even with that confession, one piece was still missing, Amanda herself. Without her remains, the case couldn't close. The news hit the neighborhood like a second thunderclap. I watched Carol from across the street when she heard. She didn't cry. She just sat down on the porch steps and looked at the ground. After a while, she said, "At least now I know she wasn't alone when it happened." Her voice broke on that last word. That night, Morales came by one more time just before the sky went dark. He leaned against my railing, eyes fixed on the park down the street. "We're going to find her, Frank," he said. He moved her once, maybe twice. But the city keeps its secrets for only so long. The street was quiet except for the rustle of palm leaves. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled low, promising rain. Morales looked tired but determined, the kind of man who doesn't stop until the last stone is turned over. When he left, I stood there watching the headlights fade down the block, and I thought about that bracelet buried, found, and speaking louder than any word could. Sometimes in life, you don't get clear answers, only the direction they're pointing. That night, as the storm broke over Coconut Grove, I knew we were headed towards something deeper, something that had been hiding in the dark for far too long. The night Morales told me they were going to search one more property, the air outside smelled like rain on copper. He'd stopped by my porch after dark, same as he always did when the weight of the case got too heavy to carry alone. He didn't sit, just leaned against the rail, flipping a cigarette between his fingers without lighting it. "We've been missing something," he said, looking out toward the park where the streetlights made little halos in the humidity. Navarro gave us a clue. Salazar mentioned a place off the grid somewhere quiet. I asked what that meant, and he said, "Somewhere nobody would think to look." There was a kind of finality in his voice, the sound of a man who'd run out of patience with shadows. The next morning, I followed the news vans down toward the edge of the Everglades. It wasn't the glossy part you see on postcards. This was the back country, the kind of place where the air turns thick and still, where mosquitoes rise in clouds and the water laps at the road's edge. The property was nothing but a half-collapsed boat shed, tucked between mangroves and brackish water tin roof, sagging boards split gray with age. Morales was there standing a few feet from the door with his team. You could hear the buzz of insects and the low hum of the generators powering their lights. Every now and then, one of the techs would call for a marker flag, the kind they used to number evidence, and you'd hear it snap as they planted it in the mud. When they rolled back that sheet of metal covering the corner of the shed, the smell hit first stale air rot and something else chemical and sharp. One of the forensic techs called out, and Morales moved closer. I could see his shoulders tense, his hand lift slightly as if he were steadying himself. They'd found a large plastic drum sealed tight. When they pried the lid open, the world seemed to go quiet, except for the soft clicking of the cameras. Even the birds went still. No one said her name out loud, but we all knew. Later that day, I went down to the medical examiner's office with Carol. She didn't want to go alone. The building was cold and sterile, but the people inside carried themselves gently. They showed us a photograph, nothing graphic, just enough to confirm what Morales already knew. A small tattoo on the ankle, a lotus flower Amanda had drawn herself years before. Carol's hand found mine, her fingers trembling but steadying as she nodded. "That's her," she whispered. 8 years of searching ended in one breath. The report came back a few days later, blunt force trauma to the skull consistent with a fall or with being pushed. Morales believed Navarro's story now that Salazar had attacked Amanda during a confrontation, panicked when she hit her head, and called Navarro to help hide it. Still, hearing it said out loud didn't make it real. It just deepened the silence that had followed her absence. The trial began that October. Miami courthouse, old brick tall ceilings that made every word echo. I sat behind Carol every day, the air heavy with that mix of disinfectant and dust you only find in courtrooms and hospitals. Salazar came in wearing a tailored suit, polished shoes, his expression carved from stone. I'd seen his type before, men who'd learned to hide their guilt behind good posture. His lawyers argued it had been an accident, that he'd simply tried to defend himself when Amanda startled him at his construction lot. They called it a tragedy, not a crime. But the evidence told another story. The prosecution laid out the sequence of events piece by piece: the bracelet, the sneakers, the buried cash, the late-night calls, and finally, Navarro's confession. It wasn't glamorous or fast. It was steady, methodical, like building a wall one brick at a time. When they showed the photo of the bracelet on the screen, the courtroom went so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioner. Carol turned her face away, and I did too. Some images are too heavy to look at straight on. During Navarro's testimony, he spoke in a flat voice, eyes fixed on the table. He said Salazar had been drinking that night, furious after Amanda rejected him at a design expo a few days earlier. He'd hired her for freelance work and mistaken her kindness for interest. When she told him she wasn't interested, he followed her, learned her routine. That night, she walked past the lot and he confronted her. The push wasn't an accident. It was rage, pure and fast. Navarro said when he arrived, she was already gone. Salazar had paced the dirt, repeating, "She shouldn't have been here," over and over. Then he paid Navarro to help bury her, promising more money if he kept quiet. They'd moved her twice, first to the lot, then to that shed out by the glades when the searches got too close. Navarro said he'd been haunted ever since. I remember looking at Salazar as those words fell into the room. He didn't blink, not once. Only his jaw shifted slightly, like someone trying to grind down what was left of his pride. The jury didn't take long, 6 hours behind closed doors, and when they came back, the foreman's voice shook just a little as he said guilty. Second-degree murder evidence tampering. 25 years. Salazar's face didn't move. Carol sat still for a long time, then let out a sound that wasn't quite relief, wasn't quite grief. It was the sound of something breaking loose after being held too long. Outside, the sun was low orange light bouncing off the courthouse glass. Morales stood on the steps, tie-loose shirt clinging to his back. "It's done," he said quietly. But he didn't sound satisfied, just tired. I asked him if it ever felt like justice was enough. He didn't answer right away. "It's something," he said finally. "Sometimes that's all we get." The weeks that followed felt strange, like the neighborhood didn't know how to breathe again. People left flowers at the park gate, drawings, little notes written in fading ink. Carol started a foundation in Amanda's name, Amanda's Light, she called it. Scholarships for young artists, workshops for kids who needed a safe space to create. She said it helped her keep her daughter alive in the world somehow. Morales came by one last time before his retirement. We sat on my porch again the same way we had all those years earlier, only now the conversation was slower, the pauses longer. He told me there was one last piece of the puzzle that still bothered him. "We found something in Salazar's financials," he said. "A payment to a private investigator right before she disappeared." He took a sip of his coffee, watching the street. He'd hired someone to follow her. That revelation hit harder than anything else. All those years we thought Amanda had just crossed paths with a man who lost control. But the truth was darker. He'd planned it, watched her, turned her kindness into an obsession. Morales said they found the investigator's report in Salazar's office notes about Amanda's routine, her favorite cafe, the exact route of her evening walks. Reading that made my stomach turn. Later that night, Morales brought Carol a copy of the report, along with Amanda's old sketchbook they'd recovered from her apartment. She sat on the couch, flipping through the pages, the beaches, the palm trees, the cityscapes, and then she stopped. There, in charcoal, was a man's face, strong jaw, dark hair, faint scar along the cheek. In the margin, Amanda had written, "Creepy guy from the expo, won't stop calling." It was Salazar. She'd seen him for what he was, long before any of us did. Carol pressed her hand against that page for a long time, tears streaking quietly down her face. She knew, she said. She tried to tell us the only way she knew how. The sketch became the centerpiece of the exhibit Amanda's Light, later organized at the library. They titled it, "Art is Truth." I remember standing there on opening night surrounded by Amanda's friends, young artists and families from the neighborhood. The air smelled of paint and paper, and for the first time in years, Carol smiled. It was small, weary, but real. Morales retired soon after. He left Miami with Amanda's photo in his wallet, a reminder, he said, of why he stayed in the job longer than most. The Everglades shed was torn down the lot by the park cleared and sold. But every time I drive by that stretch of road, I still glance toward the fence line, half expecting to see a glint of silver catching the sun. It's strange how a story can start with a single missing person and end up revealing an entire life's worth of hidden corners, greed, obsession, silence. But beneath all that darkness, what I remember most is the way light found its way through a bracelet, unearthed, a confession whispered a mother's strength refusing to bend. Now when the evening settles and the air hangs heavy with salt, I can still see Carol walking to the park at dusk. She stops by the tree the city planted for Amanda, runs her hand along the plaque, and stands there until the streetlights come on. And every time that same thought returns to me, the truth always waits patient, as the tide until someone brave enough goes looking. And yet, as I learned soon after, even the tide doesn't bring up everything at once. There was one more secret buried under that waterlogged city, one that none of us saw coming. After the trial, life didn't rush back the way you think it would. Justice has a sound to it in the movies, sharp, decisive, final, but in real life it comes quieter, like the settling of dust after a long storm. When the verdict came down and the courtroom emptied, Carol and I walked out into the Miami sunlight, blinking against it. The city was loud again, horns, gulls, traffic, but for us it was all muffled. Salazar was gone, taken into custody without a word. Navarro would serve his time too. The law had spoken, but what it left behind was something the law can't measure: the hollow spaces that used to hold laughter, the air that still felt charged with something unfinished. A few months later, the banyan tree went in at Peacock Park. The city planted it on a clear December morning, the kind where the sky looks scrubbed clean after rain. Carol stood beside the workers as they pressed soil around the base, and when they were done, she placed a bronze plaque at its roots. "For Amanda Ransom Forever, our artist." The wind carried the smell of the bay, that soft, briny sweetness that somehow makes everything ache a little. People from the neighborhood came and stood quietly, some holding small sketches Amanda had made over the years. Nobody spoke much. We didn't need to. The tree said everything that could be said. Time has a way of softening things, even grief, though it never really leaves. Carol found a rhythm again, little by little. She poured herself into the foundation she'd started Amanda's Light. I went with her to the first scholarship presentation. It was held in a small community hall that smelled faintly of paint and lemon cleaner. The recipient was a young woman from Little Havana, shy but steady, who'd been using recycled materials to make art about her neighborhood. When she stood up to thank the donors, her voice shook just like Amanda's used to when she read aloud. Carol smiled, then not the brittle smile she'd worn in the hard years, but something gentler. "She would have liked this," she whispered. I believed her. Morales retired not long after the trial. He stopped by one evening to say goodbye, his badge tucked in an envelope, the lines in his face deeper than I remembered. "You know," he said, "I used to think closing a case meant something clean. But it doesn't. It just means you stop chasing." He looked out towards the park where the streetlights were coming on. Some stories just follow you home. I asked him if this one would. He nodded once. Every day. He moved upstate near St. Augustine. Sometimes he sends Christmas cards, photos of the coast, a short note in his careful handwriting. Last year's just said, "Still walking the quiet places, still listening." I think that's his way of saying he hasn't stopped looking, even if there's nothing left to find. As for me, the neighborhood looks the same on the surface, but it isn't. The old lot where they first found Amanda's bracelet was finally developed. It's a coffee shop now, glass front string lights, laughter spilling out on weekend nights. People sit at those tables without knowing what the ground once held. I don't fault them for that. Life keeps moving. It has to. But sometimes when I walk by in the early morning before the doors open and the city's still half asleep, I swear I can feel the quiet underneath it, all the part that remembers. Carol still lives across the street. The hibiscus hedge she and I planted years ago has grown wild, reaching over the fence line. She lets it. Says Amanda would have liked it that way, untamed but beautiful. Every Sunday she brings fresh flowers to the banyan tree. Sometimes if I see her walking down the block with that little bundle in her arms, I join her. We don't talk about the trial anymore, or Salazar, or any of it. We just stand there listening to the leaves rustle. They make a sound like soft applause when the wind moves through, as if the world itself is trying to say, "She mattered." The sketchbook they found Amanda's last one sits in a display case at the library, now part of an exhibit on local artists. It's open to that page she drew months before she died, the man with the scar, the faint warning written in the margin. People who visit don't always understand its story, not fully, but they stop and look anyway. I've seen them. Something in that drawing holds their attention, like they can sense the truth living in the pencil lines. Maybe that's the closest thing to immortality being seen by strangers who feel something they can't explain. I've thought a lot about safety since all this happened, how thin the line really is between routine and ruin. Amanda wasn't reckless. She didn't walk into danger blind. She just trusted the world to stay as kind as she was. That's what breaks me most. We raise our children to see beauty, to believe that kindness can disarm cruelty. And when that faith is betrayed, it doesn't just wound a family, it wounds a whole community. For a long time, I blamed myself for not noticing sooner, for not sensing that something dark had entered the neighborhood. But with time, I learned that monsters don't always come in the form we expect. Sometimes they wear good suits and drive nice cars and hide behind contracts and handshakes. They smile at you while you pass in the grocery store. There's comfort, though, in what Amanda left behind. Her art, her foundation, her mother's courage. Those things outlast the cruelty that tried to erase them. On the first anniversary after the trial, the city held a small vigil under the banyan tree. Dozens showed up, neighbors, police, artists, even the landscaper who'd found the bracelet. He stood quietly off to the side, his hat in his hands. Carol read a short letter she'd written to Amanda. It wasn't about grief anymore. It was about gratitude. "You taught me," she said, "that even the smallest light can reach the darkest place." When the candles were lit, the park glowed softly. You could hear the bay lapping against the seawall, smell the salt mixing with melted wax. People began to leave in ones and twos, their footsteps fading into the night. I stayed behind with Carol until the last flame went out. She looked at me and said, "I think she'd want us to live now." I didn't answer, just nodded. The truth was, I'd been waiting to hear her say that for years. These days the banyan's roots are deep, its branches stretching wide over the park. Kids climb it unaware of what it represents, their laughter rising through the leaves. Every time I see that, I feel something settle inside me. The world didn't stop after all. It kept growing the way trees do, slowly, quietly toward the light. I still keep a copy of the newspaper from the day Salazar was convicted. It's yellowed around the edges now, folded neatly in the drawer by my desk. Not because I need to remember what he did, but because it reminds me that the truth, no matter how long it hides, always finds a way to surface. Sometimes it's buried under soil. Sometimes it's tucked inside a sketchbook. Sometimes it's carried in the hands of a mother who refuses to stop searching. I think about Morales's words often, how some stories follow you home. This one still does. but not in the same way it used to. It doesn't haunt me anymore. It hums quietly in the background of my days like an old song you can't quite forget. It's become part of the neighborhood's rhythm. The creak of a porch swing, the buzz of the streetlight, the soft click of a door locking at night. When I walk past that tree in the park, I sometimes whisper her name under my breath, not out of sadness, but recognition. Amanda. She's not a ghost to me anymore. She's a reminder to pay attention, to be kind, to speak when silence would be easier. Because the moment we stop saying their names, the moment we stop remembering, that's when the darkness starts to win again. So if you've listened this far and this story stayed with you, share it not for views or clicks, but so no one's name gets lost to the dark. Tell it to someone who still believes ordinary places are safe, or to someone who's forgotten that the truth has a way of rising. Because sometimes what begins as tragedy ends as testimony. And in a small park by the bay, under the shade of a growing tree, that testimony still whispers every time the wind moves through the leaves.